Sergeant Daniel Green.
Raise your right hand for me. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give to the court in this trial will be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may have a seat. Adjust that microphone so that it fits you comfortably. And if you'll state your name and spell your last name for the record.
My full name is Daniel Green. My last name Greene.
Sergeant Green, how you doing today?
I'm good.
All right, tell us where you work.
I work for the Colleton County Sheriff's Office.
Okay, and your rank is sergeant, obviously, is that correct?
That's correct.
Tell us just a little bit about yourself. Just give us just a little bit of your background that led you to your career in law enforcement, if you would, please.
Sure. I went to school here, grew up here, went to college at Charleston Southern University. I got a degree in social studies education, taught for a little while, and then got into law enforcement. Just kind of fell into it and liked it. And I've been here since 2014.
Okay. You started with the Sheriff's Department in 2014?
That's correct.
All right, and what was your first job that you did, or how does your career progress?
I started at the jail. I worked there for just over a year, and then I was moved to the road patrol. I was on road patrol for several years, moved up the ranks to sergeant, where I was a road patrol supervisor, and now I'm a detective.
Okay. When did you become detective?
Earlier last year. It would have been June of last year.
Back in June of 2021, what was your job at that particular time with the Sheriff's Department?
In June of 2021, I was a road patrol sergeant supervisor.
All right, and explain how that works. What's your exact role as a sergeant and a road patrol supervisor?
So for the most part, I'm assigned a team consisting of 3 to 4 deputies, just depends, that include a corporal as well as several other deputies. My job primarily is to supervise them in their in a 12-hour shift. We answer calls for service. Sometimes I'll go with other deputies to calls that require more than one officer to be present. But the majority of my job is supervising what they do.
And during June of 2021, were you working day shift or night shift, or how did that work?
I was on night shift at that point.
And what are the hours of the night shift?
So we swap every 2 months. So 2 months you'll be on days, 2 months you'll be on nights. For those hours, it's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Okay. And let me take you to the evening of June 7th, 2021. Were you working that particular evening?
I was.
And what shift were you working that day?
We're on night shift.
And again, so what hours would that be?
Working from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
So you went on duty at 6 p.m., is that
I did,
correct?
yeah.
Okay. And you said you're the sergeant. What was do you have a squad that you're supervising that are out during that shift? Explain that to the jury, if you would, please.
So that shift consisted of myself being the sergeant. I had a corporal and 2 deputies working as well. And at that point, I had a lieutenant who was my immediate supervisor. He was working as well.
All right. And can you tell me who those people were?
Sure. So my corporal was Corporal Janicki, and the 2 deputies working with me were Deputy William Pruitt and Deputy Chad McDowell.
All right. And the lieutenant was who?
Lieutenant Lonnie Nettles.
Did you, on the evening of June 7th, 2021, get a call for service at 4147 Moselle Road?
I did.
You remember approximately what time that was?
Later in the evening, several hours into my shift.
Okay. And did you ultimately respond to that location?
I did.
What was reported to you that led to the call for service from dispatch?
That there was a caller who stated he had found his wife and son shot.
And so tell me what happens then. You get that report. What do you do?
So I get that call for service. Obviously, we immediately respond. In situations like that, we would respond with lights and sirens to get there as quickly as possible.
You're driving fast to get there?
Yes.
Lights are on?
Lights were on, siren was on. I think it still took me close to 20 minutes to actually get to the scene from where I was. But
you have to ask dispatch to clarify the address?
I did. Once I got out there, it's a very dark area, very rural area on Moselle Road. There were not a whole lot of residences in the area, and I did need clarification once I got out there to confirm the address. Then I located the address on a mailbox across the street from a driveway.
So you saw the mailbox in the driveway you entered, is that correct?
That's correct.
The driveway that you entered that had this mailbox, where did it ultimately lead? What structures were there as you pulled up to the scene?
As I pulled down the long driveway, when I got to the end of it, there was a dog kennel area on the left as well as a shed area on the right.
Okay. And that was the driveway with the mailbox, correct?
That was.
Is this location where the scene was, is it in Colleton County?
It is.
Tell me just a little bit before we get into more specifics. What was the, you said it was dark. What was the weather like? What was the conditions of the scene or the weather in the scene like?
So quite normal for June around here. It's rather hot and humid. It had been raining a little bit off and on that evening. It was not raining at the time that I actually responded to the scene.
Okay. Were you the first law enforcement officer or first responder on the scene?
I was.
Were there others, other first responders following close behind?
The additional first responder that was directly behind me worked for Colleton County Fire Rescue. He pulled in almost the same time I did.
When you had arrived at the scene, before we talk about what you actually experienced at this scene, what is your main job at a scene like this? What are you there to do as a first responder, the first officer on the scene?
So a major crime scene like that, my job is to get there, secure the scene, and what I mean by secure the scene is ensure that there are no individuals there that would potentially cause harm to additional first responders coming there or any witnesses or victims that are already on scene. Preserve any evidence that might be there, and then wait for investigators to arrive as I gather information from anybody else that is already on scene.
Okay. So you're going to gather basic information, but your job's not to investigate it in great detail.
That's correct.
Okay. As you arrived at this scene, again, what had been reported to you by dispatch?
That a male caller had called and said he found his wife and son shot.
And from that report to you, about how long did it take you to ultimately make it onto the scene?
It was roughly about 20 minutes.
Okay. When you arrived on scene, when you said one of the things that you do is secure the scene, were you at all concerned about any perpetrators still being there at that point in time?
When I arrived, not necessarily, just because he had already been there for quite a while. Whenever he called, it seemed, the way the call came in, that he discovered them like that and that there was nobody else there other than him and the wife and son.
So you're the first officer on scene, but you're not thinking the perpetrators are still there?
It's something you have to keep in the back of your mind, but not necessarily at the forefront.
Okay. All right. You didn't come in hot with guns drawn or anything like that?
No.
When you arrived at the scene and you walked and got out of your car, what did you see?
So as soon as I got out of my vehicle, I was walking down the rest of the driveway, which went between the dog kennel and the shed. As I could see Mr. Murdaugh down at the end of the driveway. As I approached toward him, I could see the male victim laying on the ground to my left, as well as the female victim on the ground to my right. The male victim was close to a small shed in the dog kennel on the left. There was a large deal of blood that had pooled around his body. Same thing for the female victim on the right. Also a large amount of blood around her body.
As you approached and then first saw the male victim and the female victim, what was your assessment? Was there any possible signs of life from your...
My initial assessment was that there was not. There appeared to be a large amount of blood around each of them, as well as brain matter.
Did you ultimately have a conversation with Mr. Murdaugh when you were out there?
I did.
And do you see him here in the courtroom today, the person that you talked to?
I do.
And can you point him out to the jury, please?
Yes, sir. He's right there, wearing a dark blue or black jacket.
Your Honor, can the record reflect that he's identified Mr. Murdaugh?
It does.
When you ultimately approached Mr. Murdaugh, what's the first thing that you did?
The first thing I did was ensure that he did not have any weapons on him. That's standard procedure for arriving on a scene like that. Any kind of weapons that are anywhere on the scene, I want to be aware of just so I can know whether they're there or not, and if they are there, who has access to them at any point. And that's for my safety as well as other responding officers and for anyone else that's on scene.
Did Mr. Murdaugh give you any possible explanation for this when you approached him?
His immediate reaction was to start telling me about an incident that had happened with his son with a boating accident.
With the boating accident?
Yes, sir.
Had you asked him anything about that?
I did not.
You ultimately, were you wearing a body-worn camera that particular day?
I was.
You ultimately had a conversation with Mr. Murdaugh for a fairly extended period of time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you ever see any tears in your interactions with Mr. Murdaugh?
He did not appear to be crying. He was upset, but I did not see any visible tears.
Did Mr. Murdaugh tell you that he had any sort of firearm?
He did. He stated that he had left from that scene, went to the residence, grabbed a shotgun from that residence, and then brought it back because he felt like he needed to have it just in case something else were to happen.
He told you he had gone back to the residence after finding the victims to get that gun?
He did.
What, if anything, did you do once he told you that he had gotten a gun?
First, he pointed out where the gun was. It was leaning against the vehicle that he was driving at the time. I could see that it was a camouflage shotgun. I spoke with him for a few more minutes, and just based off of how nervous he was acting and anxious and upset, I decided it was in everyone's best interest to get that shotgun and secure it in my vehicle so that no one else had access to it.
Okay. So you put that shotgun in your vehicle, is that correct?
I did.
What did you ultimately do with that shotgun? Did you later turn it over to additional law enforcement?
Yes, after it was secured in my vehicle, once SLED arrived on scene to do their further investigation, it was then turned over to SLED.
Bear with me 1 second.
Okay.
Your Honor. State 3, I believe I've moved without objection.
It's admitted without objection.
May I ask that we have the Elmo working, please?